The moment someone has to invent a rule to control you is usually the moment they've already lost. I learned that lesson before sunrise on a Tuesday, standing in my own driveway with a travel mug of coffee in one hand and my work keys in the other. The neighborhood was just beginning to wake up. Porch lights blinked off one by one. Automatic sprinklers whispered across perfectly trimmed lawns. Somewhere down the street, a garage door rolled open, followed by the familiar sound of a school bus braking at the corner. My work truck sat exactly where it had every weekday for the past 3 years. It wasn't oversized. It wasn't leaking oil. It wasn't blocking traffic. It was a clean white contractor pickup with my electrical company's logo neatly displayed on both doors. The truck was my office, my toolbox, and the reason I could pay the mortgage on the house behind me. As I walked toward it, something bright caught my eye. A large red sticker stretched across the driver's side window. Violation notice. For a second, I honestly thought someone had played a prank. Then I heard footsteps. Karen Mitchell crossed the sidewalk carrying a clipboard under one arm and a roll of identical red stickers in her hand. Her smile wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're already congratulating themselves. I figured you'd see it before leaving, she said. I looked from the sticker back to her. What exactly is this? She folded her arms. Work vehicles are no longer permitted in this neighborhood. I blinked. No longer. The HOA has decided we're protecting community standards. I glanced at my truck again. When did that happen? You'll receive the paperwork. That wasn't an answer. Several curtains shifted nearby. People were watching. Across the street, Mr. Donovan paused halfway through collecting his newspaper. A woman walking her dog slowed just enough to pretend she wasn't listening. Nobody said anything. They simply watched the conversation unfold. Karen seemed to enjoy having an audience. I'd move it before more fines begin, she continued. It would save everyone unnecessary trouble. I kept my voice even. I attended the last HOA meeting. She shrugged. Things change. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and casually took another photograph of my truck with the red violation sticker clearly visible. Click. Another angle. Click. As though documenting a crime scene. The coffee in my hand had gone cold, but I barely noticed. What bothered me wasn't the sticker. It wasn't even Karen. It was the sentence she had repeated twice. Work vehicles are no longer permitted. Those words sounded rehearsed, almost rehearsed enough to discourage questions. I peeled one corner of the sticker away from the glass. The adhesive resisted before finally giving way. Cheap paper. Fresh glue. Printed only hours earlier. Karen watched without saying another word. If you remove HOA property, she said calmly, I'll include that in my report. I stopped peeling. Not because I believed her. Because something about the situation felt strangely incomplete. HOAs issue letters. They send emails. They cite sections of governing documents. They don't usually ambush homeowners in their driveways before dawn with homemade stickers. I looked down the quiet street lined with identical houses, spotless sidewalks, and perfectly trimmed hedges. Everything appeared orderly on the surface. Yet something beneath that order didn't fit. Karen acted like the decision had already been made. But I couldn't remember anyone voting on it. I couldn't remember seeing a proposal. And I definitely couldn't remember reading anything that banned work trucks altogether. I unlocked my truck and placed the red sticker carefully on the passenger seat instead of throwing it away. If Karen wanted me to remember this morning, I had a feeling I'd want to remember it too. At the time, I thought the sticker was the real story. I had no idea it would become the smallest piece of evidence in a much larger mistake Karen was about to make. By the time I got home that evening, Karen had already managed to turn one red sticker into a neighborhood conversation. I didn't hear people talking. I saw it. Neighbors who usually waved while walking their dogs suddenly found something fascinating to look at across the street. A man watering his lawn gave my truck a quick glance before pretending to adjust his sprinkler. Even the teenagers riding bicycles slowed down long enough to read the company logo on my doors before continuing toward the park. Nothing had changed about the truck, only the story attached to it. Inside my mailbox waited a large white envelope stamped with the familiar HOA logo. So the paperwork had arrived, just as Karen promised. I carried it inside without opening it. Dinner could wait. Curiosity couldn't. The letter looked official enough. Heavy paper, board letterhead, formal language. It informed me that my contractor vehicle was allegedly inconsistent with the residential appearance standards of the community and advised that work trucks would no longer be permitted to remain overnight within neighborhood boundaries. It sounded authoritative, until I reached the bottom. There was no board president's signature. Only Karen Mitchell, Neighborhood Compliance Committee. I read the page again, then a third time. There was still no reference to a board vote. No meeting date. No amendment number. Just confident statements written as though everyone should immediately accept them. Before I could think much further, my phone vibrated. An email notification. Then another. Then another. The HOA community mailing list had become unusually active. Karen had apparently sent a message to every homeowner reminding residents that commercial vehicles negatively affect neighborhood property values, and thanking everyone in advance for supporting the community's new standards. Replies began appearing almost immediately. Some homeowners simply responded with short comments. Glad someone is finally addressing this. Long overdue. Thank you for keeping the neighborhood beautiful. Others asked questions. When did this pass? Was there a vote? Those questions received no public answers. Instead, another email arrived from Karen only minutes later. The board appreciates everyone's cooperation during this transition. The wording caught my attention. The board appreciates, not the board approved. There was a difference. A subtle one, but an important one. I leaned back in my chair and opened the HOA website. Every association keeps records somewhere. Meeting notices, minutes, budget reports, election results. It wasn't exciting reading, but it was usually organized. The most recent meeting agenda was still available. Landscaping, pool maintenance, fence repairs, holiday decorations. Nothing about work trucks. Nothing about commercial vehicles. Nothing remotely close. Maybe I had missed another meeting. I checked the calendar. Nothing. As I searched, another notification appeared on my phone. Karen had posted a photograph in the neighborhood social group. It showed my truck parked neatly in my driveway. The red violation sticker was perfectly centered in the picture. The caption read, "Thank you to residents who support protecting our neighborhood standards." My address wasn't listed. It didn't need to be. Everyone recognized the driveway. Comments began appearing beneath the photo. Some supported her. Some stayed neutral. A few neighbors privately sent me messages asking what had happened. I answered every one of them the same way. I'm still looking into it. Because that was the truth. I wasn't interested in arguing online. Arguments disappear. Records don't. I printed the letter. Then I printed Karen's email. Then I saved screenshots of the neighborhood post before any comments could disappear. One folder. One growing stack of paper. At first, I thought I was simply organizing documents. Looking back, I was preserving the exact moment confidence started replacing authority. Karen clearly believed everyone would accept her version of the rules without asking a single question. I intended to ask one, just not until I knew exactly where to find the answer. The next morning, the neighborhood looked exactly the way it always had. The sidewalks were clean. The lawns were perfectly edged. American flags moved gently in the summer breeze. From a distance, nothing suggested that one homeowner had quietly become the center of everyone's attention. I drove to work before sunrise, finished a full day of electrical service calls, and returned just after 5. My truck was still sitting in my driveway. Waiting for me was another envelope. This one wasn't tucked. Neatly inside my mailbox. It had been taped directly to my front door. Karen wanted to make sure I saw it. The heading was larger this time. Second notice of non-compliance. According to the letter, I now had 48 hours to remove my work truck from the neighborhood or face daily fines. If I continued to ignore the alleged violation, the HOA reserved the right to pursue additional enforcement measures. Again, there was no citation to an approved amendment. No meeting reference. No vote. Just the same broad statement claiming contractor vehicles were prohibited. One sentence caught my attention. The restriction was adopted pursuant to the association's governing authority. That was it. No article number. No section. No page. Just governing authority. It felt strangely incomplete. As if someone expected homeowners to stop reading the moment they saw legal-sounding words. While I stood on my porch, another vehicle slowly rolled past my house. Karen's SUV. She wasn't driving quickly. She wasn't even pretending to be. She lowered her passenger window just enough to point her phone toward my driveway. Click. Another photograph. Then she continued around the corner without saying a single word. I almost laughed. If she had simply left the letters in my mailbox, I probably would have spent another day assuming this was nothing more than HOA bureaucracy. Instead, she kept documenting my truck as though she were building a criminal case. That level of confidence usually comes from one of two things. Either someone knows they're right, or they've never considered they could be wrong. Later that evening, I logged back into the HOA homeowner portal. This time, I wasn't looking at announcements. I opened the document archive. Years of board meeting minutes were organized by date. Every budget, every election, every landscaping contract, every approved amendment. I searched one phrase. Commercial vehicle. Nothing. I searched again. Work truck. Nothing. Contractor vehicle. Nothing. I expanded the search to every document available. Still nothing. That didn't prove Karen was wrong. It only proved something important was missing. Then I noticed a small detail. Buried in the website footer. Official governing documents could only be amended after a recorded board recommendation and a membership vote meeting the percentage required under the declaration. That sentence stayed in my head. Membership vote. I couldn't remember attending one. Neither could any of the neighbors who had emailed me. Out of curiosity, I called my next-door neighbor, Mark Jensen. Mark had lived here nearly 12 years. If anyone remembered a vote, it would be him. Commercial trucks? He repeated over the phone. No, I would have remembered that. Half the people on this street work in construction or utilities. Did you hear anything about new rules? No, just Karen talking about wanting them gone. Wanting them gone. Not voting them gone. That difference mattered. After hanging up, I spread everything across my dining room table. The first violation letter. The second notice. Karen's community emails. Screenshots from the neighborhood page. Printed copies of the HOA website. Individually, none of them answered my question. Together, they all pointed toward the same empty space. There was supposedly a new rule. Everyone was expected to obey it. Yet no one could tell me when it had actually become a rule. For the first time since Karen placed that red sticker on my truck, I stopped thinking about defending myself. Instead, I started wondering whether the real story wasn't the truck at all. Maybe the most important clue was a single sentence that never appeared anywhere I looked. People often assume the truth arrives with a dramatic revelation. Mine arrived as a missing paragraph. Saturday morning gave me something I hadn't had all week. Time. I carried a cup of coffee into my home office, opened my laptop, and spread every document across the desk. The violation notices sat on one side, printed emails on the other. My notebook rested in the middle with a single question written across the top. When did this rule actually become a rule? Instead of searching the HOA website again, I downloaded the complete governing documents. The declaration, the CC&Rs, the bylaws, architectural guidelines, board resolutions, hundreds of pages. Most homeowners never read them. I couldn't blame them. The language was dense, repetitive, and filled with legal terms that seemed designed to discourage curiosity. Still, every legitimate restriction had to come from somewhere. So I started reading. Page after page described landscaping standards, exterior paint colors, fences, roofing materials, holiday decorations, parking around fire hydrants, recreational vehicles, trailers, and abandoned automobiles. Hours passed. Coffee turned cold. Highlighter marks filled the margins. Yet every time I expected to find a sentence banning contractor trucks, the document moved on to something else. Then I reached the parking section. My eyes slowed. Passenger vehicles, motorcycles, boats, trailers, commercial equipment. There it was. Except, it didn't say what Karen had been claiming. The paragraph simply authorized the association to regulate the long-term storage of commercial equipment under specific circumstances approved by the governing documents. It said nothing about ordinary work trucks used for daily transportation. Nothing. I read the paragraph again. Then I read the footnotes. One reference led me to another section explaining that any additional parking restriction required formal adoption through the amendment procedures outlined elsewhere in the declaration. I flipped to that section. There it was. Clear. Simple. No interpretation required. Any new restriction affecting homeowner property rights required notice, a properly called meeting, and approval under the voting requirements established by the governing documents. Not a committee announcement. Not a neighborhood email. Not a compliance officer's opinion. An actual vote. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since Karen confronted me in my driveway, I wasn't merely suspicious. I knew something didn't fit. That realization didn't make me angry. Oddly enough, it made me calmer. Facts have a way of doing that. I opened every board meeting minute from the previous 12 months and searched for the word parking. Several discussions appeared. Residents had complained about overnight trailers. Someone asked about RV storage. Another homeowner requested additional guest parking. But there was never a motion to prohibit work trucks. There wasn't even a discussion. It was as though Karen's rule had appeared out of thin air. Just then my phone rang. It was Lisa Hernandez, one of the homeowners who had privately messaged me after Karen's community post. "I didn't want to say this online," she said quietly, "but Karen came to my house last week asking me to support a proposal about contractor vehicles." "A proposal?" "Yes." I stopped writing. "A proposal hasn't been voted on." "No." She said she hoped to get enough support before bringing it to the board. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. That single sentence changed everything. If Karen had been gathering support for a proposal only a week earlier, how could she already be enforcing it? After we hung up, I added one more sheet to the growing binder on my desk. Timeline. Proposal discussed. No recorded vote. Rules suddenly enforced. The documents weren't proving what Karen had done. Not yet. But they were proving something almost as important. The authority she kept quoting seemed to exist everywhere except in the only place that actually mattered, the governing documents themselves. And that missing authority was beginning to look less like an oversight and more like the foundation of her entire case. By Monday morning, I had stopped asking whether Karen was wrong. The only question left was how much she actually knew. People make honest mistakes. They misunderstand rules. They misread documents. But continuing to enforce a restriction after the documents contradict you, that becomes something entirely different. Before leaving for work, I slipped a 3-ring binder onto the passenger seat of my truck. The red violation sticker rested inside the front pocket. Behind it sat every notice Karen had delivered, every community email, every screenshot, every page of the CC&Rs with highlighted sections, every board meeting minute I had downloaded over the weekend. The binder wasn't evidence yet. It was simply organized memory. Throughout the day, I kept thinking about one conversation. Lisa had told me Karen was still trying to gather support for a proposal only days before my first violation notice. That timeline refused to make sense. After work, instead of driving home, I stopped at the county records office. Most people assume HOA documents exist only inside the neighborhood. Many don't realize the original declaration, amendments, and recorded governing documents are public records. If a restriction had truly been adopted, there was a good chance I could trace its history. The clerk behind the counter pointed me toward the digital archive. Within minutes, I found the recorded declaration. Then every officially recorded amendment. Each amendment followed the same pattern. Meeting notice, membership approval, recording date, document number. One after another. Everything was documented. Everything except Karen's work truck ban. There wasn't a single recorded amendment expanding the parking restrictions she claimed already existed. Not one. I printed the index anyway. Paper has a way of slowing your thoughts. As I flipped through the pages in the parking lot afterward, another detail surfaced. Every previous amendment had taken months. Some required multiple meetings. Some failed before finally passing. Yet Karen expected everyone to believe an entirely new parking restriction had quietly appeared overnight, without anyone remembering a vote. The more I looked, the less believable her story became. On my drive home, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an email. It was a text from Mark. Tow truck just drove through the neighborhood. I looked at the dashboard clock. 6:18 p.m. A second message arrived before I reached the entrance. Karen was talking to the driver. I turned onto our street. The tow truck was parked near the clubhouse. Its amber lights flashed against the windows of nearby houses. Karen stood beside the driver with a clipboard tucked against her side. She pointed toward different streets while speaking. When she noticed my truck approaching, she stopped talking. Our eyes met through my windshield. She smiled. Not warmly, confidently, like someone already expecting the outcome. The tow truck pulled away a few seconds later without loading anything. Still, the message had been delivered. She wanted everyone to know enforcement was becoming real. I parked in my driveway and watched the truck disappear around the corner. Most neighbors stayed inside. A few watched quietly from their porches. Nobody applauded. Nobody objected. Silence filled the street. Back inside, I opened the binder once more. One section still felt incomplete. State law. Until now, I had focused almost entirely on the HOA's own governing documents. But governing documents don't exist in isolation. They're limited by state statutes. If Karen's authority wasn't supported by the declaration, perhaps state law would explain exactly where those limits ended. I opened my laptop and began searching. An hour later, another stack of printed pages joined the binder. The language was technical. The implications were simple. HOAs could enforce valid restrictions. They could not simply invent them. I closed the binder and rested my hand on the cover. For the first time since this began, I wasn't collecting documents because I hoped to find an answer. I already had one. Now I was collecting enough proof to make sure everyone else would see it too. By the end of the week, my dining room no longer looked like part of a home. It looked like preparation. The binder had grown thick enough that the rings barely closed without pressure. Every document had a purpose. Every page had a tab. Red for violation notices, blue for HOA emails, yellow for governing documents, green for recorded amendments, white for state statutes. I wasn't building a case to win an argument. I was building one that wouldn't require arguing at all. Late Friday afternoon, another email arrived from Karen. The subject line was brief. Final compliance notice. According to her message, I had exhausted every opportunity to correct the violation voluntarily. Daily fines would begin immediately, and additional enforcement options, including vehicle removal by an authorized contractor, were now under consideration. The wording was careful. Under consideration. Not approved. Not scheduled. Just enough to create fear. I printed the email and slipped it behind the previous notices. Then I noticed something else. Every message Karen had sent over the past week came from the Compliance Committee email address. None of them included the HOA president. None copied the property management company. None identified a board vote authorizing enforcement. She was speaking with the confidence of the association, but always in her own voice. That distinction became another divider in the binder. Authority claimed. Authority verified. The first section continued growing. The second remained almost empty. Saturday morning brought another surprise. I stepped outside to wash the truck before heading to a service call, only to find an orange notice tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Not from the tow company. Not from the police. From Karen. Vehicle observed in continuing violation. Observation date. Observation time. Photograph taken. It read more like an inspection report than an HOA notice. I looked toward the clubhouse. Karen stood nearly 100 yards away, speaking with two landscaping contractors. She glanced in my direction for only a moment before returning to her conversation. She wanted me to know she was watching. Instead of throwing the notice away, I photographed it exactly where I found it. Then I photographed the truck, the driveway, the house number, the surrounding street. If details mattered to Karen, they would matter to me as well. Later that afternoon, Mark stopped by carrying 2 folders. I figured these might help, he said. Inside were printed minutes from HOA meetings he had personally saved over the years. I'm terrible at throwing paperwork away. For the first time all week, I smiled. Sometimes the people who save everything become unexpectedly valuable. Together we compared his copies with the digital records I had downloaded. Every page matched. No missing meeting. No hidden amendment. No forgotten vote. Nothing. Mark leaned back in his chair. You know what's strange? What? If there really had been a vote this big, Karen would have talked about winning it. He was right. Karen talked constantly about protecting property values, community standards, neighborhood appearance. Yet she never mentioned the date the members supposedly approved the restriction, only the restriction itself. That silence felt deliberate. As evenings settled over the neighborhood, I placed one final document into the binder. A timeline. Every sticker, every email, every notice, every photograph, every conversation, every board record, lined up by date. The sequence revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated before. Karen's enforcement had started first. The authority to justify it never appeared afterward. I closed the binder and rested both hands on its cover. It no longer represented research. It represented certainty. Whatever happened next would no longer depend on memory, opinion, or confidence. It would depend on paper. And paper has a remarkable habit of exposing people who mistake authority for permission. When the next HOA meeting notice appeared in my mailbox 2 days later, I didn't feel nervous. I simply opened the binder, slipped the meeting agenda into the front pocket, and realized I had been preparing for that room since the morning Karen placed a red sticker on my truck. The clubhouse was already half full when I arrived. Plastic folding chairs faced a long table where the HOA board members arranged stacks of agendas and bottled water. The fluorescent lights washed every face in the same pale color, making the room feel less like a community meeting and more like a waiting room where everyone expected unpleasant news. I carried only one thing: the binder. It rested against my leg as I walked to an empty chair near the back. Several neighbors glanced toward it before looking away. Word had spread over the past 2 weeks. Not because I had told anyone, because Karen had. She moved confidently around the room, greeting homeowners by name, collecting proxy forms, and speaking with the easy certainty of someone who believed the evening would unfold exactly as planned. When she saw me, her smile never changed. "You decided to come." "I did. I hope you're prepared to discuss compliance." "I am." That was all either of us said. There was nothing else worth saying. The meeting began with routine business: approval of previous minutes, financial reports, pool maintenance, landscaping contracts, questions about mailbox repairs. Everything moved with practiced efficiency. Then the president reached the compliance section. Karen stood before anyone called her name. She carried a clipboard instead of a binder. "My committee continues addressing several ongoing violations," she announced. Her voice filled the room with remarkable confidence. "We've made excellent progress protecting neighborhood standards." Several homeowners nodded. She continued. "One particularly visible violation involves the overnight parking of a commercial work vehicle that does not comply with our governing restrictions." She never mentioned me by name. She didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned toward my chair. Karen clicked a remote. A photograph appeared on the projector screen. My truck, parked exactly where it had always been. Clean, properly maintained, completely inside my driveway. Another photograph followed. Then another. Different angles. Different days. She had apparently documented my truck for over a week. "The owner has received multiple notices," she continued. "The association has been more than patient." Again, no names. Only implication. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes. Property values. Community appearance. Neighborhood expectations. Preserving standards. The words flowed smoothly, confidently. Not once did she mention a meeting date where the restriction had been adopted. Not once did she mention a membership vote. She spoke as though the rule had always existed. When she finally finished, the board president looked around the room. "Any homeowner comments?" Silence. Karen folded her hands together. Satisfied. Then I stood. The binder felt heavier than it had that morning. Not because it weighed more. Because every page inside represented another opportunity for facts to speak louder than opinions. I walked calmly to the podium. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. No anger. I placed the binder on the table and opened it to the first tab. "I have only one question," I said. The room became perfectly still. Karen crossed her arms. "If the restriction prohibiting my work truck already exists," I continued, "could someone please tell me when the homeowners approved it?" Nobody answered immediately. The board president looked toward Karen. Karen answered before anyone else could. "It falls under the association's governing authority." The exact phrase. The same one from every letter. Every email. Every notice. I nodded once. "I've read the governing authority." She smiled politely. "So have I. I've also read every recorded amendment." Her smile narrowed slightly. "Every board meeting minute from the past year." Silence settled across the room. "And every document filed with the county." Several board members exchanged quick glances. Karen remained standing, still composed, still confident. "Then you already know the rule." I slowly closed the binder without removing a single page. "Actually," I said, meeting her eyes for the first time that evening, "I know something much more important." The room became so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed loud. Karen waited for me to continue. She had spent 2 weeks presenting photographs, emails, violation notices, authority. She believed the evidence favored her. She had no idea that the only document anyone would remember from that meeting was the one she had never bothered to read. No one spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant. Karen stood with both hands resting on the edge of the board table, her expression still composed, though the certainty that had carried her through the evening had begun to soften around the edges. The board president looked at me. "What is it that you know?" Instead of answering immediately, I opened the binder to the first tab. Not dramatically, carefully. The sound of thick paper turning seemed louder than anyone clearing their throat. "I'll keep this simple," I said. "I spent the last 2 weeks looking for the rule that says my truck can't be parked in my own driveway." I placed a highlighted copy of the declaration on the table. "This is the parking section." Then another document. "This is the amendment procedure." Then another. "These are the recorded amendments filed with the county." Finally, I laid down the board meeting minutes. "These cover every meeting from the past year." Nobody interrupted. I continued. "I found regulations about trailers." I slid one page forward. "Recreational vehicles." Another page. "Abandoned automobiles." Another. "Temporary construction equipment." One more. But nowhere did I find a restriction prohibiting a licensed work truck parked overnight in a homeowner's driveway. The board president leaned forward. Karen remained perfectly still. I also searched every meeting minute. I tapped the stack lightly. There is no motion. Another tap. No discussion. Another. No recorded vote creating the restriction described in every violation notice I received. A board member near the end of the table quietly opened his own copy of the governing documents. Pages began turning. Another director did the same. The room filled with nothing but paper. Karen finally spoke. "The board has general authority to interpret the governing documents." I nodded. "It does." She seemed encouraged. "And that's exactly what we've done." I reached into the binder one last time. "This isn't an interpretation." I placed a single highlighted page in front of the president. "This is the amendment clause." He lowered his eyes to the highlighted sentence. I waited while he read it. Then I read it aloud. "Any new restriction affecting the use of privately owned property shall require approval by the membership under the voting procedures established in this declaration." Nobody moved. I didn't need to explain the sentence. It explained itself. The president looked toward Karen. "When was this vote held?" Karen answered immediately. "It was covered under existing authority." He looked back down. "No." His voice was quiet. "This language specifically says a vote." Karen opened her mouth, then stopped. One of the other board members began flipping rapidly through the meeting minutes. "I don't remember one," she admitted. Another director shook his head. "Neither do I." Someone from the audience spoke for the first time. "I've lived here 9 years." It was Mark. "I would have attended." Another homeowner added quietly. "I never received notice." Then Lisa raised her hand. I remember Karen asking whether people would support a future proposal. The room changed. Not loudly. Gradually. Until then, every conversation had assumed I was defending myself. Now everyone was asking the same question. If the proposal was still being discussed, why had enforcement already begun? Karen looked around the room as though searching for someone willing to answer on her behalf. Nobody did. The president slowly removed my violation notice from the binder. Then he compared it with the declaration. Then with the meeting minutes. Finally, he placed both hands flat on the table. "I can't find any authority for this enforcement action. No accusation. No anger. Just a statement." Karen's confidence disappeared almost invisibly. Her shoulders lowered. She glanced toward the projector screen where my truck was still displayed. For the first time all evening, the photograph no longer looked like evidence against me. It looked like evidence against the process that had targeted me. I quietly closed the binder. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone of bad faith. I hadn't needed to. Sometimes the strongest argument isn't the one you make. It's the one the documents make after everyone finally reads the line that had been sitting there all along. The meeting ended without applause. There was no dramatic confrontation. No one stormed out. The board president simply announced that enforcement against my truck would be suspended immediately while the association conducted a formal legal review of every notice that had been issued. Those words landed more heavily than any argument I could have made. Karen gathered her papers without looking at anyone. The projector screen went dark. The photograph of my truck disappeared. For 2 weeks, it had been presented as the neighborhood's problem. Now it was just a truck again. People left the clubhouse slowly. Several neighbors stopped beside me. Not to congratulate me. To apologize. "I should have asked questions before assuming you were wrong. I believed what I read online. I'm sorry." I thanked each of them. None of us stayed on the subject very long. That seemed appropriate. The point had never been to embarrass anyone. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than when I had arrived. I placed the binder on the passenger seat and drove home along the same streets where every driveway looked exactly as it had the week before. Nothing had changed, except the way people were looking. Monday morning, another email arrived. This one came from the HOA president rather than Karen. It was addressed to every homeowner. After consultation with legal counsel, the association had determined that no recorded amendment prohibited licensed work vehicles parked in private driveways. All pending enforcement actions related to that interpretation were withdrawn. Previously assessed violations were rescinded. Any fines connected to those notices would be canceled. The board also announced that any future parking restriction would require the notice and membership vote described in the governing documents. I read the message twice. Then I closed my laptop. There was nothing else to do. When I walked outside, my truck sat exactly where it had been every morning. The windshield was clean. No red sticker. No orange notice. No warning tucked beneath the wiper blade. Just sunlight reflecting across the hood. Over the next several weeks, small changes appeared throughout the neighborhood. Board meeting agendas became more detailed. Meeting minutes were published on time. Homeowners started asking questions instead of accepting announcements without explanation. Attendance at meetings quietly doubled. Karen remained in the neighborhood. Occasionally, I saw her walking between houses or speaking with residents near the clubhouse. We passed each other more than once. Neither of us stopped. Neither of us needed to. Our final conversation had already taken place inside a binder filled with documents. Months later, Mark laughed as we watched a delivery van pull into another driveway. Looks like work trucks survived. I smiled. They were never really on trial. He looked at me for a moment before nodding. He understood. The truck had only been the excuse. The real issue had always been whether authority could replace accountability. Every now and then, someone asks why I kept every document instead of simply moving the truck. The answer is always the same. Because rules matter. But so does the process that creates them. Without that process, rules become opinions with official letterheads. The binder still sits on the highest shelf in my office. I haven't opened it in a long time. I probably never will again. I keep it for a simple reason. Not as a reminder that I won, but as proof that patience can be stronger than outrage, preparation can be louder than accusations, and facts rarely need dramatic speeches to reveal the truth. The truck never moved. The law never changed. The only thing that changed was that someone finally read the words that had been there from the very beginning. And once that happened, the neighborhood stopped following the loudest voice in the room and started following the documents instead.